There is a moment that changes everything. A single second when the world tilts and nothing ever looks the same again. For me, that moment happened on a Tuesday afternoon in April, standing in my sister's empty apartment while she was supposed to be at work. I had borrowed her spare key months earlier to water her plants during a vacation she took, and I had forgotten to return it. That day, I needed a serving platter I had lent her for a dinner party she had hosted the previous month. She was not answering her phone, and I figured I would just pop in, grab it, and leave. I thought nothing of it. We were sisters, after all. We had shared everything our entire lives. What I found in that apartment destroyed me. I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back, because for you to understand the depth of what my sister did to me, you need to understand who we were before. You need to see the foundation she built her betrayal upon, brick by careful brick, over decades of our shared existence. My name is Olivia Hart, and I am 32 years old. I grew up in a modest 3-bedroom house in a suburb of Philadelphia. My parents, Claire and Robert, were good people in the way that word gets used loosely. They kept us fed, clothed, and educated. They attended our school plays and drove us to soccer practice. But there was always something missing in that house, some warmth that never quite reached the corners. My mother was obsessed with appearances, with what the neighbors thought, with presenting a perfect family portrait to the world. My father was a numbers man, quiet and withdrawn, living in spreadsheets and tax codes until he retired and found himself with nothing to say to any of us. Megan came into the world 3 years after I did, and from the moment she arrived, something shifted in our household. I was too young to understand it then, but I felt it. The attention that had been mine suddenly belonged to someone else. I remember standing on my tiptoes at the hospital, trying to see into the bassinet where this tiny stranger slept, wondering why everyone was so fascinated with something that just lay there and cried. Growing up, people always said we looked alike. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same dimple on the left cheek when we smiled. But I always thought the similarities ended at the surface. I was the quiet one, the reader, the girl who spent hours alone in her room, drawing pictures and writing stories. Megan was the social butterfly, the one who collected friends like other children collected trading cards. She was louder, brighter, more demanding of attention. Teachers adored her. Boys noticed her first. Our mother doted on her in a way she never quite managed with me. I never resented Megan for any of it, at least not consciously. She was my baby sister, and despite our differences, I loved her fiercely. When she cried in middle school because the popular girls excluded her from a birthday party, I held her and told her those girls were not worth her tears. When she struggled with algebra in high school, I spent hours tutoring her at the kitchen table. When her first boyfriend broke up with her the week before prom, I took her shopping for a new dress and convinced her that showing up alone was actually a power move. That was who I thought we were. Two sisters navigating the world together, different but connected by blood and history and love. I was wrong about everything. After high school, I attended the Tyler School of Art at Temple University, majoring in graphic design. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, mostly because my parents were vocally disappointed in my choice. My mother wanted me to become a nurse or a teacher, something respectable and stable. My father worried about the money, about loans I would never repay, about careers that did not exist, but I pushed through their skepticism because art was the only thing that made me feel alive. I graduated with honors and landed my first job at a small marketing agency in Center City, Philadelphia. The pay was terrible, but the experience was invaluable. Megan, meanwhile, floated through life without much direction. She started at community college, dropped out after 1 semester, worked as a hostess at a restaurant, then as a receptionist at a dental office, then as a sales associate at a clothing store. Nothing stuck. Our mother always made excuses for her. Megan was still finding herself. Megan was more of a people person than an academic. Megan had so much potential, she just needed the right opportunity. I tried not to compare us. I told myself that everyone's path was different, that success was not a race, that my sister would figure out her life in her own time, but there was a small, shameful part of me that felt validated by my own achievements. I had worked hard, and it had paid off. I was building something. When I was 25, I met Daniel Reeves at a coffee shop near my office. He was a software engineer, tall and serious, with wire-rimmed glasses and a dry sense of humor that took me completely by surprise. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, and by the time I walked home that night, I knew my life was about to change. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and we married 6 months later in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Bucks County. It was the happiest day of my life. My sister was my maid of honor. She gave a beautiful speech about how I had always been her role model, her protector, her best friend. I cried. Everyone cried. 3 months after my wedding, Megan announced that she had enrolled in a graphic design program at a local technical school. I remember the dinner when she told us. We were at our parents' house, eating pot roast and green beans, and Megan could barely contain her excitement. She had finally found her calling, she said. She wanted to do what I did. She had always admired my work, and she realized she had the same creative instincts. She looked at me with those green eyes, so similar to my own, and asked if I would help her with her portfolio. I should have felt flattered. Instead, I felt something cold move through my chest, something I could not name. I pushed it away and smiled and told her of course I would help. That was what sisters did. Over the next 2 years, I watched Megan transform. She absorbed everything I taught her like a sponge, and she had natural talent that I had not expected. She started dressing differently, too, trading her flashy clothes for the more understated aesthetic I preferred. She cut her hair in a style almost identical to mine. She started listening to the same music I liked, reading the same books I recommended, watching the same obscure foreign films I had mentioned in passing. When I updated my apartment with mid-century modern furniture, hers suddenly looked the same. When I took up yoga, she joined the same studio. When I mentioned wanting to learn French, she enrolled in an online course and became conversational within a year. Daniel noticed it before I did. One evening, after we had dinner at Megan's new apartment, he sat on the edge of our bed and looked at me with concern in his eyes. He said he did not want to upset me, but had I noticed how similar Megan's place was to ours? The same grey couch, the same brass light fixtures, even the same print of the Gustav Klimt painting in the hallway. I laughed it off. We were sisters, I said. We had the same taste. It made sense that our homes would look similar. But Daniel planted a seed that night, and once it took root, I could not stop seeing things. Megan got a job at a design agency in Philadelphia, not the same one where I worked, but a competitor. She landed clients in similar industries. Her portfolio began to look eerily like mine, not copied exactly, but inspired by the same color palettes, the same typography choices, the same minimalist approach I had spent years developing. When I mentioned it to her casually, she brushed it off. We had similar training, she said. Of course our work would overlap. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. The alternative was too disturbing to contemplate. Then she met Ethan. Ethan Porter was a software engineer at a tech startup in the city. He was tall and serious with wire-rimmed glasses and a dry sense of humor. Do you see where this is going? When Megan introduced him to the family at Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago, I felt the room spin. He could have been Daniel's brother. He spoke the same way, laughed at the same things, had the same habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking. Our mother was delighted. She kept commenting on how Megan had found her perfect match, just like I had. She kept looking between the 4 of us like we were some kind of matched set, proof that her daughters had chosen wisely. I pulled Megan aside that night under the pretense of helping her with the dessert. In the kitchen, with the sounds of football and family conversation drifting from the living room, I asked her where she had met Ethan. She said they had matched on a dating app. What dating app? I pressed. She named the same one Daniel and I had briefly tried years ago before meeting in that coffee shop. I asked her what criteria she had used, and she listed the same parameters I had once mentioned in passing. Tall, professional, glasses, dark hair, dry humor, someone who would rather stay home and read than go to a loud bar. She had built herself a Daniel. I did not sleep that night. I lay next to my husband in the darkness, listening to him breathe, and I replayed every memory I had of my sister through a new lens. The career choice, the apartment, the clothes, the hobbies, the boyfriend. How much of Megan's life was actually hers? How much of it was mine, reproduced and repackaged? I tried to bring it up to my mother. I called her on a Saturday morning and carefully, hesitantly, explained my concerns. There was a long silence, and then my mother laughed. She actually laughed. She said I was being paranoid and a little self-centered. Megan admired me, that was all. Imitation was the sincerest form of flattery. I should be grateful that my little sister looked up to me so much. When I pressed harder, when I listed the specific examples, my mother's tone changed. She became defensive, then cold. She said I had always been competitive with Megan, even when we were children. She said I resented my sister's success because I wanted to be the only successful daughter. She told me I should be ashamed of myself for trying to tear down my own flesh and blood out of jealousy. I hung up the phone and cried for an hour. Daniel held me and listened as I poured out everything. He did not tell me I was crazy. He did not dismiss my concerns. He simply said that we needed more information before we could understand what was really happening. He suggested I pay closer attention, document things, look for patterns. His analytical mind was a comfort when my emotions were threatening to drown me. So I started watching. I started taking notes, and the more I looked, the more I found. Megan had not just copied my career. She had applied to the same jobs I had in the years before I secured my current position. I found this out through a former colleague who mentioned that Megan's resume had crossed their desk years ago, listing the same work experience and skills that I had emphasized when I was job hunting. She had not gotten those jobs because they already had me. Megan had not just copied my aesthetic, she had systematically duplicated every aspect of my personal brand, from the Instagram handle I had created for my freelance work to the fonts I used in my business cards. She even replicated my signature style of handwritten thank you notes to clients, using the same stationery I had sourced from a small shop in Vermont. And Ethan? The more time I spent around him, the more convinced I became that Megan had screened for him specifically. She wanted a Daniel, and she had found the closest approximation available. But here is where it gets worse. Here is where the story turns from unsettling to something far more sinister. I have a friend named Sophie Chen. We met in college and stayed close through all the years since. Sophie works in marketing, and she is one of those people who always knows what is happening everywhere. She has connections in every industry, and she hears things before anyone else. When I confided in her about Megan, Sophie did not hesitate. She started digging. 2 weeks later, Sophie called me with news that changed everything. Megan had been telling people she was me. Not literally, not using my name, but effectively. Sophie had a contact at a company where Megan had interviewed for a senior design position, a role that was far above Megan's actual experience level. During the interview, Megan had presented a portfolio that included several projects. Sophie's contact recognized one of those projects. It was mine, a complete rebrand I had done for a restaurant chain 2 years earlier, work that had won me an award and significant recognition in the industry. Megan had presented it as her own, slightly modified, but unmistakably mine. She had not gotten the job because the interviewer happened to know someone at my company who had been involved in the project. But Megan had tried. She had sat in that room and claimed my accomplishments as her own without hesitation. When Sophie told me this, I felt sick. My hands shook so badly I had to put down my coffee cup. All those years of helping my sister, of mentoring her, of sharing my knowledge and my work and my life with her, and she had been using it all to build a version of herself that was just a reflection of me. I confronted Megan that weekend. I showed up at her apartment unannounced, still shaking with anger and hurt, and I told her what I knew. I expected denial. I expected excuses. What I got was so much worse. Megan looked at me with those green eyes, so identical to mine, and she smiled. It was not a nervous smile or an embarrassed smile. It was cold, calculating, satisfied. She asked me what I expected her to do. I had always had everything handed to me, she said. The talent, the opportunities, the perfect husband. She had grown up in my shadow, watching everyone praise me while she struggled to be seen. So she decided to stop struggling. She decided to take what she deserved by becoming me. She was not ashamed. She was proud. I stood there in stunned silence while she continued. She told me I should be flattered. Everything good in her life existed because of me. My career had shown her the path. My style had given her identity. My relationship had provided the template for her own happiness. Without me, she said, she would be nothing. And that was exactly why she could never let me pull ahead again. I asked her what that meant, and she just smiled again. That same cold, terrifying smile. I left her apartment that day, and I did not speak to her for 3 weeks. I ignored her calls and texts. I blocked her on social media. I told Daniel everything, and he was as horrified as I was. He wanted to cut her out of our lives completely, but I was not ready to give up on family. I kept hoping there was an explanation, that this was some kind of breakdown or mental health crisis that could be addressed. I wanted to believe my sister was still in there somewhere, beneath the mask she had created from pieces of my life. Then I got the call from my boss. Helen Marshall had been my supervisor at the agency for 6 years. She was a tough, no-nonsense woman who had mentored me through my career and become something like a friend. When she asked me to come into her office that afternoon, I assumed it was about a new project or a client issue. What she told me instead felt like a knife between my ribs. There had been a complaint, an anonymous tip, actually, sent to our parent company's ethics hotline. The complaint alleged that I had been stealing work from a junior designer at a competing agency and passing it off as my own. The complaint included screenshots of that designer's portfolio alongside my published work, highlighting the similarities. It accused me of plagiarism, of fraud, of undermining a younger woman's career to advance my own. The junior designer named in the complaint was Megan Hart. My sister had reported me for stealing from her, when the truth was exactly the opposite. Helen believed me. She had seen my work develop over the years, and she knew those projects were mine. But the parent company was taking the complaint seriously, and there would be an investigation. My name would be dragged through the mud. My reputation, which I had built so carefully over a decade, was at stake. I went home that night and fell apart. Daniel found me curled up on the bathroom floor, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. He held me until I calmed down, and then he said something that changed my perspective entirely. He said Megan was not confused. She was not having a breakdown. She was strategic. She had been copying my life for years, and now she was trying to steal it completely. The complaint was not impulsive. It was calculated. If she could destroy my reputation, she would become the original. She would have my career, my style, my boyfriend template, and no one would remember that any of it had come from me first. Daniel was right. This was not sisterly rivalry taken too far. This was war. I decided to fight back, but I was not going to be stupid about it. If Megan was strategic, I would be more strategic. If she was calculating, I would be more calculating. I would not give her the satisfaction of watching me crumble. I would expose the truth, but I would do it on my own terms. The first thing I did was gather evidence. I spent every evening after work compiling a timeline of my career, with dates and documentation for every project I had ever completed. I pulled up old emails, original design files with creation timestamps, client contracts with my name on them, awards and recognition that predated Megan's entire career in the industry. I built a fortress of proof that my work was my own. But I needed more than that. I needed to prove that Megan had been copying me, not the other way around, so I started digging deeper. Remember that key to Megan's apartment, the one I had never returned after watering her plants? That is where this story began, and now you understand why I used it. I waited until a Tuesday when I knew she would be at work. Her office had a mandatory all-hands meeting every Tuesday afternoon, which she complained about regularly. I let myself into her apartment with shaking hands, unsure what I was looking for, but certain I would find something. What I found was a room. Behind the guest bedroom, there was a small office space that Megan used as a design studio. I had been in there before, seen her drafting table and her computer and the inspiration board on the wall, but tucked into the closet of that room, hidden behind a rolling rack of clothes, was a filing cabinet I had never noticed. Inside that cabinet was my entire life. She had folders labeled with my name. She had printed screenshots of my social media accounts going back years. She had copies of every public project I had ever posted, annotated with notes about what she could use and how she could adapt it. She had a folder of photos of me, Daniel, our apartment, our wedding. She had a journal filled with observations about my life, my habits, my preferences, written in her handwriting with an obsessive attention to detail. But the worst thing in that cabinet was a folder labeled Next Steps. Inside were plans, detailed, meticulous plans for how Megan intended to continue copying my life and eventually replace me entirely. There were notes about reaching out to my clients directly, positioning herself as an alternative to me. There were strategies for undermining my reputation, including the anonymous complaint she had already filed. There was a list of my professional contacts with notes about who she had already approached and who was next. And at the very bottom of the folder, there was a wedding announcement. A mock-up of a wedding announcement for Megan and Ethan, designed to look almost identical to the one Daniel and I had sent out 3 years earlier. My hands were ice cold as I photographed every page. She was not just copying my life. She was trying to erase me from it. I took those photographs and I left her apartment, locking the door behind me and promising myself that I would make her pay for every single thing she had done. But I could not just expose her. That would be my word against hers, and Megan had already proven how skillfully she could manipulate perception. If I came forward with accusations, she would position herself as the victim. She would cry to our parents, tell them I was attacking her out of jealousy, show them her successful career and her perfect relationship as proof that I was just threatened by her happiness. I needed to let her destroy herself. Sophie was instrumental in this phase. She understood corporate politics and reputation management in ways that I did not, and she helped me construct a plan that was elegant in its simplicity. We were not going to attack Megan directly. We were going to give her enough rope to hang herself. The first step was dealing with the ethics complaint. I provided the investigation with every piece of documentation I had, proving beyond any doubt that the work was mine. I included creation dates from my files that predated Megan's career by years. I included client testimonials. I included the original contracts. The investigation was closed within 2 weeks, and I was fully exonerated. The parent company even apologized for the stress the complaint had caused. But here is the part Megan did not expect. As part of closing the investigation, the ethics committee reached out to her employer to verify her claims. They requested her portfolio, her project documentation, her proof of original work. And when her employer started looking closely at what she had submitted, things fell apart quickly. Megan had not just copied my work. She had copied from other designers too, including people at her own agency. Projects she had claimed credit for were actually the work of colleagues. Client work she had presented as her own had originated in other departments. Her entire professional existence was built on theft and lies, and once people started looking, the evidence was everywhere. She had folders labeled with my name. She had printed screenshots of my social media accounts going back years. She had copies of every public project I had ever posted, annotated with notes about what she could use and how she could adapt it. She had a folder of photos of me, Daniel, our apartment, our wedding. She had a journal filled with observations about my life, my habits, my preferences, written in her handwriting with an obsessive attention to detail. But the worst thing in that cabinet was a folder labeled Next Steps. She was fired within a month. But I was not finished. The second step was addressing our family. This was the hardest part, because despite everything, I still craved my parents' understanding. I still wanted them to see the truth, even if I knew they might not believe me. I invited my parents to dinner at our apartment, along with Sophie as a witness. Daniel was there too, ready to support me, and I laid everything out. I showed them the photographs from Megan's apartment. I showed them the timeline proving that I had been the original in every aspect of our professional overlap. I showed them the ethics complaint and the results of the investigation. I showed them everything. My mother cried, but not in the way I expected. She cried because she was angry with me. She accused me of invading Megan's privacy, of going through her things, of trying to destroy her. She said whatever Megan had done, she was still my sister, and I had no right to humiliate her like this. She demanded to know how I could be so cruel. My father said nothing. He just sat there, staring at the photographs, his face gray. It was Daniel who finally spoke. He asked my mother how she would feel if Megan had done this to a stranger instead of to me. Would she defend her then? Would she make excuses for theft and fraud and deliberate sabotage if the victim was not her own daughter? My mother had no answer. I told my parents that I loved them, but I could not have Megan in my life anymore. I told them they would need to choose how to navigate that, but I was done being her target. I was done being her template. I was done being the person she was trying to become by erasing. They left that night without resolving anything. My relationship with my parents became strained, cordial but distant. They still see Megan, still make excuses for her, but they stopped expecting me to do the same. The third step was the most satisfying. Megan had been telling people for years that she was an up-and-coming designer, a rising star, a woman to watch in the industry. She had cultivated connections and impressed potential clients and positioned herself for success. But all of that was built on a foundation of lies, and now those lies were exposed. I did not have to do much. The design community is small and word travels fast. Once Megan was fired for plagiarism, people started talking. Colleagues she had stolen from came forward with their own stories. Clients she had approached using my work as her portfolio discovered the truth and spread the word. Awards she had falsely claimed were retracted. Her professional reputation collapsed in on itself like a sandcastle meeting the tide. Within 6 months, Megan could not find work in design anywhere. Her name had become synonymous with fraud. Her LinkedIn profile went dark. Her Instagram, which had once been full of confident posts about her creative journey, was deleted entirely. Ethan left her. I learned this from Sophie, who heard it through mutual connections. Apparently, he had started to notice the cracks before the scandal broke, but the public exposure was too much. He could not reconcile the woman he thought he loved with the person she had revealed herself to be. They broke up 2 months after she lost her job. I should have felt triumph. I had wanted consequences, and consequences had arrived. But what I felt instead was a complicated mix of relief and grief. Relief that the nightmare was over, that my life was my own again. But grief for the sister I had thought I had, the relationship I had believed was real. I had lost something that had never actually existed, and there is a strange mourning in that. About 3 months after Ethan left her, Megan reached out to me. She sent an email, long and rambling, full of excuses and half apologies and attempts to rewrite history. She said she had been struggling with mental health issues. She said our childhood had damaged her in ways I could not understand. She said our parents had always compared her to me, always found her wanting, and she had cracked under the pressure. She said she was sorry, but really, was any of it her fault? I did not respond. She sent more emails over the following weeks, each one more desperate than the last. She blamed me for destroying her career, even though all I had done was tell the truth. She accused me of turning the family against her, even though our parents still defended her at every opportunity. She demanded that I help her rebuild, that I give her a second chance, that I remember she was my sister, and family was supposed to be unconditional. I blocked her email address. A year passed. My life continued. Daniel and I started trying for a baby, and I threw myself into that hope, into the future we were building together. My career flourished without the shadow of my sister's imitation. I developed new work that was unmistakably mine, and I received recognition that felt earned and real. Sophie and I grew even closer, bonded by the trials we had weathered together. I thought it was over. I really truly believed that Megan had accepted defeat and moved on. Then I discovered what she had been doing behind my back. It happened at a conference, a major industry event in New York City, where I was scheduled to speak on a panel about ethical design practices. Ironic, I know. I was backstage, reviewing my notes, when a woman approached me with a confused expression. She introduced herself as a magazine editor, and she said she was surprised to see me at the conference because she had been told I was no longer working in design. I asked her what she meant. She explained that she had reached out to me several months earlier about a feature article on emerging designers. She had been directed to my supposed representative, who informed her that I had stepped away from the industry due to personal reasons and that any inquiries should be redirected to my sister, who was carrying on my design philosophy. The representative had provided a phone number. When I asked the editor to share it with me, I recognized it immediately. It was Megan's new number. She had not given up. She had just gone underground. Over the next few weeks, I uncovered the extent of what Megan had been doing since her public disgrace. She had reinvented herself under a different name, using our mother's maiden name, and started a small freelance business. But she was not marketing herself honestly. She was intercepting opportunities meant for me, redirecting potential clients and journalists and collaborators to herself, claiming to be my representative or successor. She had created social media accounts that implied she was connected to my work without ever stating it explicitly. She posted about design philosophy using concepts I had written about, described projects in language that echoed my case studies, built a brand that existed in my shadow while pretending to be adjacent to me. It was more subtle than before, more careful. She had learned from her exposure and adapted. I was furious. After everything, after all the consequences she had faced, she still could not stop. She was still trying to be me, still trying to steal my life piece by piece. Daniel wanted to involve lawyers. He argued that what she was doing constituted fraud, misrepresentation, possibly identity theft. He wanted to pursue legal action and put an end to this once and for all. But I had a different idea. Legal action would be expensive and slow, and the outcome was uncertain. Megan was being careful not to cross clearly defined legal lines. She was using implication and misdirection rather than outright lies. A court case could drag on for years and might not result in the closure I needed. Instead, I decided to give her exactly what she wanted. I reached out to Megan through her new business email, but I did not identify myself. I posed as a potential client, a major retailer looking for a complete rebrand of their visual identity. I described a project that would be a career-defining opportunity, exactly the kind of high-profile work that Megan had always craved. She responded within hours, eager and enthusiastic. We exchanged emails over the course of 2 weeks, and I was careful to document everything. I asked for her portfolio, her references, her background. She provided all of it, and as I suspected, it was full of misrepresentations. She claimed experience she did not have, listed clients she had never worked with, presented work that was not hers. Then I arranged a meeting. I told her the client wanted to discuss the project in person before making a final decision. I suggested a conference room at a co-working space in Philadelphia, a neutral location where she would feel comfortable. She agreed eagerly. When she walked into that conference room, she was dressed in an outfit nearly identical to one I had worn to a recent speaking engagement. Her hair was styled the same way. She carried a bag that was a knockoff of mine. She had even adopted my posture, my way of holding myself, the gestures I made when I spoke. She stopped dead when she saw me sitting at the table. I had assembled witnesses. Sophie was there, along with a lawyer friend who specialized in intellectual property. Daniel was waiting outside in case things escalated, and I had a folder in front of me containing every piece of evidence I had gathered over the previous weeks, every fraudulent claim she had made, every lie she had told. I gave Megan a choice. She could admit to everything, sign a legal agreement never to impersonate me or misrepresent her connection to my work again, and walk away with the possibility of rebuilding her life honestly. Or I could pursue formal legal action, share my documentation with her current clients and contacts, and ensure that this reinvention failed as spectacularly as the first. She sat there in silence for a long moment. I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes, the same strategic mind that had orchestrated all of this, trying to find an angle, an escape, a way to spin this in her favor. Finally she spoke. She asked me why I could not just let her have something. She asked me why I had to take everything from her. She said all she had ever wanted was to matter, to be seen, to have a life that people admired, and I had all of that effortlessly while she had to fight for scraps. I told her that nothing I had was effortless. I had worked for every opportunity, earned every accomplishment, built every relationship through effort and intention. The difference between us was that I had done it honestly. She had tried to take a shortcut by becoming me instead of becoming herself. She started to cry. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then she said something that killed any remaining compassion. She said I had stolen her identity first, by being born before her, by being better, by being the daughter our parents actually loved. She said everything she had done was just balancing the scales, taking back what should have been hers all along. I realized then that there was no reaching her. No amount of consequence would make her understand what she had done. In her mind, she would always be the victim, and I would always be the thief who had stolen her rightful place in the world. She signed the agreement. She had no choice. But as she left the conference room, she looked back at me with those green eyes and smiled that cold smile. She said this was not over. 2 years have passed since that day. Megan has kept her distance, at least in ways I can detect. She moved to another city, started another career in a completely different field. She does not work in design anymore. She cannot. Her reputation is destroyed, and the legal agreement prevents her from trading on my identity. My parents and I have slowly repaired our relationship, though it will never be what it once was. They finally acknowledged that Megan's behavior was wrong, even if they still struggle to fully condemn her. They love her. They cannot help it. She is their daughter too. Daniel and I had our first child 6 months ago, a daughter with dark hair and green eyes. When I look at her, I see the future. I see the chance to build a relationship between siblings that is not defined by competition or jealousy or theft. If we have another child someday, I will do everything in my power to ensure they never feel like they are living in each other's shadow. I think about Megan sometimes. Late at night, when the baby is asleep and the house is quiet, I wonder if she ever thinks about who she might have been if she had not spent so much energy trying to be me. She had talent. She had charm. She had capabilities that were entirely her own, but she was so consumed with wanting what I had that she never developed what was uniquely hers. There is a grief in that, even now. Not for what she did to me, but for what she did to herself. She could have been so much more. She could have built a life that was genuinely hers, filled with accomplishments that belonged to her alone. Instead, she wasted years constructing a counterfeit existence, and when it collapsed, there was nothing underneath. I do not forgive her. I am not sure I ever will. What she did was not a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, sustained campaign to erase me and take my place. And she continued even after she was caught, even after she faced consequences, even after she had every opportunity to change. But I do not hate her either. Hatred requires too much energy, too much focus, too much of myself given over to someone who does not deserve it. I have moved past hatred into something quieter, a kind of wary peace. My life is my own. My work is my own. My family, my home, my identity are all mine, earned and protected and cherished. No one can take that from me now. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of someone on the street who looks like me, same build, same coloring, same style, and my heart stops for just a moment. But it is never her. It is just a stranger, going about their own life, wearing their own identity like a comfortable coat. I learned something important through all of this. I learned that being yourself is the only real currency you have in this world. Everything else can be copied, borrowed, stolen. But the core of who you are, the experiences and choices and values that make you unique, that cannot be replicated. Megan could copy my clothes and my career and my aesthetic, but she could never copy the person I had become through my own journey. She tried to steal my identity, but she only revealed that she had never developed one of her own. And in the end, that was the most fitting consequence of all. I am not the girl who grew up in the shadow of her charismatic younger sister anymore. I am not the woman who made excuses for behavior that should have alarmed me, who dismissed warning signs because family was supposed to mean unconditional acceptance. I am not the victim who crumbled when her reputation was threatened. I am someone who survived betrayal from the person who should have been safest. I am someone who stood up and fought back, not with cruelty or vengeance, but with truth and strategy. I am someone who refused to let another person define the boundaries of my existence. I am Olivia Hart. Not the template, not the original that someone else copied, just myself. And that is more than enough.